Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this lecture series. I'm happy to introduce to you all Margot Bloomstein. Margot is principal of Appropriate Inc., a leading brand consultancy based in Boston. She received a BFA with a minor in anthropology from CMU School of Design in 2000. Shortly after graduating, she joined Sapient and honed her skills in content strategy, which is a crucial aspect of digital marketing that involves planning, aggregating, and governing valuable and relevant content for optimal user experiences. So if design focuses on visual problem solving, executing through choices of color, typography, density of information, content focuses more on verbal problem solving, pulling levers of style and tone, word choice, and content types or formats. Margot is also a published author. She advises Women Talk Design and teaches at FH Joanneum University in Graz, Austria. Some of her clients include Harvard University, Fidelity, Mailchimp, Sallie Mae, and Timberland. Margot, thank you so much for joining us, and please go ahead and start your talk.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. As we've been discussing, I'm always thrilled to have the opportunity to come back to Pittsburgh, to come back to Carnegie Mellon, even if it is in this kind of more virtual format, where I can't just easily partake of like walking down the street to Dave and Andy's or Mad Mex, may it rest in peace soon. But I am really stoked to be with you today. And I'm happy to be here because I think there are some big problems that that really plague our industry, that affect a lot of the brands and organizations and campaigns and social causes on which we work. And I think that design is very well positioned to address a lot of them. So a little bit about my background. I like to think that I am in the business, that as designers, we are in the business of translation and ventriloquism. That's why we get Charlie McCarthy up there, because so much of what we do is translating between organizations and their target audiences, whether as graphic designers and communication designers, translating visually and verbally, like the qualities that are inherent to a brand and how they meet a particular target audience with whatever they're trying to do, or just how we translate the world around us into devices and products that people can use to overlay with their own experiences and expectations. And then as far as the ventriloquism side of things, with many of the organizations that I've got listed up here, I help them to communicate to their audiences. I help them put the right words in their mouths so that the qualities that they hold true about their brand, that they want to have come through about their brand and what they believe in, that can appropriately come through to their audiences, typically more verbally through choice of words and content types, but also visually through the choice of color and density of information and typeface and things like that. So as I said, I'm really excited to be here with you all today. The thing is, I want to talk about this trust problem because I don't trust you, and you shouldn't take that personally because you have no reason yet to trust me either. You know very little about me. We share a little bit of common ground there around Carnegie Mellon, but other than that, you have no reason to trust me, because we have not exchanged content, i.e. had a conversation. And that is at the core of how people come to trust other people, other organizations, government, maybe healthcare policy, the media. It's because we engage with them in some way. There's that common sort of rhetorical arena. And we need that. We need to be able to have those conversations in order to establish trust. So when I say I don't trust you, I don't want you to take it personally, because that is a bigger issue that faces leaders, big brands, any kind of governmental organization today, that their audiences, their clients, their customers, the users in user experience design, they don't trust them anymore. And I think that is what we need to address. That is something that we can address, because you can't build community. You can't move communities forward. You can't enable the work of corporations without establishing trust. So I think when we look at that kind of problem, we need to first look back a little bit. And I want to kind of take us back pretty far in looking at this so that we can first understand our history and then move forward in understanding the future and how we can put our work into it and how we can work and design our way past this problem. So as a brand and content strategist, I look at the world from a content perspective because it's something that I think businesses can strategically address, the way that they communicate with their audiences, the stuff that they put out through their websites, through their print collateral, through their brochures, through their designed spaces. I think that that's something that they can strategically address. Because we've seen how over the past decade, people have grown cynical. And that's a real problem that goes beyond just skepticism, but people have grown cynical. A lot of marketing falls flat. Sales cycles take a lot longer than they used to. We see how that plays out in the economy now. And most messages don't motivate action, even when they come from brands that maybe we grew up with or we thought we could always kind of rely on. And we see people worry more about psychological risk and safety in the workplace too. And again, I think because I'm a designer, that's a design problem. Not to say like when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail, but I do think that we can address some of those issues through the way in which we engage with design and communicate about design and really the kind of problem solving skills that we have as designers. So if people just don't trust brands the way they used to, that's not just because of the pandemic, because today we've seen how in an age of maybe fake news and kind of changing perspectives in a lot of organizations, cynicism can oftentimes seem safe. We kind of wrap it around ourselves in that sort of cooler than thou tone to say, well, I'm not going to just believe things at face value. I'm going to do my own research, even if I'm not necessarily trained as a bench scientist, as a researcher. But people turn away from experts. They take refuge in their filter bubbles until maybe they learn what those filter bubbles comprise. And they learn how communities are starting to be driven more and more by algorithms or paid accounts. We've started to learn that those filter bubbles that we kind of conveniently built, maybe were driven by, if it was on Yelp or on hotels.com, paid reviews, or maybe the news feed on Facebook, also driven by an algorithm, not just things that were popular with your friends for whatever reason. So people have started to turn inward to say, well, you can't trust anything, just going to go with my gut. The problem with just going with your gut is that when you've been surrounded by a culture that says you can't trust your gut anymore, people have started to lose confidence in their own ability to make good decisions. And I don't think that we can blame them because we've all endured failures of leadership and deception and inconsistent messaging, maybe from the halls of government or brands that we thought we knew, maybe news and media outlets that we thought we knew, only to realize they've been bought out and now have their own agendas. And when people don't know who to trust and then decide not to believe anything, that's how they become cynical. And that's a real problem today. But I think that is where content creators, content designers, people that design different spaces and places in which we consume information, that's where we can help. Because to regain trust in a community, in a corporation, in a government system, good leaders rebuild confidence. Good designers rebuild confidence by empowering people to engage with information, by saying, don't trust like that you know everything. Also, don't trust that we know everything. Here's how you can continue to learn more. We stoke their interest in self-education. And we can affirm that by affirming their hope, by affirming people's interest in learning, by affirming their enthusiasm for feeling knowledgeable. That is the work of smart brands, smart companies, smart governments, and smart designers, by building people up, not putting them down. Now, I said that I wanted to kind of take us back before we move into the future. So I want to hop into the Wayback Machine and take us way back on this, because this is not a new problem. This idea, these problems that we're dealing with, we need to go back pre-internet, pre-industrial revolution. I want to take us back to the 1500s, because then the stuff that we struggled with around trust and communication, People in the 1500s struggled with that too. Then the need for information, for good, trustworthy information, that was changing. Previously, people who sold goods, maybe candles or cloth or salt, that's what I'm trying to block, or I am blocking there with my head, a big pile of salt. They would haul their wares from town to town in a region to different markets and fairs, and life was good. A lot of people strummed their lutes and whatnot, and it worked out pretty well for them until people realized, hey, life could be better, because in the Renaissance, trading families and empires began to emerge and grow as they realized they could do business in a different way. Rather than going town to town, moving all their stuff around, instead, they could reap greater profits by staying put and engaging in arbitrage among multiple cities and countries. The catch for that, though, is that those trade merchants needed information that they could trust about those cities. So that brings us to this guy. You can see those scraps of paper on the wall behind him. They're kind of like early proto Post-it notes. I can present to you here like the father of information architecture. No, actually, this is a Renaissance era trading merchant. His name is George Graz, and he represents this emerging merchant class that ran export and import businesses at that time across all of Europe. What he has tacked up behind him there are letters, and they're letters that offered him specialized knowledge about what was going on in the different cities in which he operated. So George Graz and other merchants like him, to make good decisions, he would employ people who lived in those foreign cities to write him periodic updates about maybe if there was talk of going to war or palace intrigue or maybe gossip about possible economic changes and all. And those letter writers or correspondents, those foreign correspondents, they were the first journalists. And they were the people on the ground who could empower merchants with consistent details, a unique perspective, and openness to learning and listening, so that people could act on it, so that those merchants could then act on the wisdom that they were cultivating. So those letter writers didn't overpromise. They didn't say that they knew everything, but instead they offered the vulnerability of learning, conducting research, listening, and always growing from their user research, I guess you might say. They kept themselves open to new information and high quality content. That's a powerful thing because they were offering authority and consistency. And that's something that people still value in leaders, in letter writers, in journalists, and in the brands that they trust today. We still value it because it empowers us to make good decisions, maybe about where we buy, where we eat, how we vote, how we make healthcare decisions, that maybe even the different companies with whom we choose to partner or where we choose to bring our own services to choose to do work. Maybe that's a thing to be looking for going into Confluence. What are the organizations that you trust to make good with your talents? Now, authority comes from being willing to go where your audience cannot, maybe because of the danger or the cost or the depth of expertise that it requires. If you work inside an organization, if you're sitting down the hall from the product development team or you are on the product development team, you have specialized knowledge that your audience maybe does not. You've got specialized access that they don't have. Now, that access is something that people look for in terms of information. When you offer it, it's saying, I'm here, you're not, so let me tell you about it. Let me give you the inside scoop, maybe by seeing a product from multiple angles, or reading a more clear product description, or watching a video about it before you make that big purchase decision, or big healthcare decision, or some other thing that's going to affect you. So those foreign correspondents, they established authority by sharing their own unique voice and perspective. They didn't try to hide and become someone else or just become this monolithic voice as kind of part of the brand or organization that they represented. So they shared their own unique voice and perspective, the right volume of context and detail so as not to overwhelm the person to whom they were writing. And they also brought a degree of vulnerability into their work by sharing how their knowledge was constantly growing, maybe how they were holding themselves open to new information to correct their previous conceptions or misconceptions. So we can see that combination of voice, volume, and vulnerability in figures of sort of authority today as well. So like Anderson Cooper, when he talks to us from a region in crisis, we stop and listen and pay attention. Or when David Chang, owner and chef of the Momofuku chain, and now a star of a number of shows on Netflix, when he takes us to explore crawfish and Asian Cajun fusion food, we stop and listen and pay attention. Or when NPR's Ophabia Kistarkton comes to us live from Dakar, when she sat down with Anthony Bourdain to talk about Senegalese food, we listen to both of them. And we trust each of them for offering a unique voice, depth of knowledge that empowers us with information, that empowers us, the audience, with new perspectives. And we trust their vulnerability too, that they're willing to hold themselves open, learn, engage in new experiences, maybe correct their own misconceptions, and bring us along on that journey as well. Good, smart brands, as well as smart designers, don't hide behind this veil of discovery and then ingenious design. Rather, they're able to bring people into it and then share their knowledge that empowers those people as well. So their authority, it empowers us, it educates us, it respects us, not because they're speaking down to us. They're not gaslighting us. They're also not demanding absolute loyalty. I think we can learn a lot from that because we reward that in the form of trust. And that is what our society needs a lot more of now. I've been reading a lot from Jay Rosen, the press critic, on authority, and we can bring his thinking into our work in terms of helping organizations communicate their offering, in terms of empowering people that use a product, interact with a form, make decisions about how to spend their money or how to spend their lives. We can empower them with better information, because when people or institutions or brands have authority and engage with their audiences in a capacity to empower them, we reward it with trust. And that's a good thing that we need more of. But when a brand starts to break from what we know and trust in their voice, in their subject matter, in their product array, maybe they become inconsistent or irrelevant, those are issues that actually stoke our cynicism. We don't want more of that, but we see a lot of that anyhow. And it's inconsistency that erodes our very ability to trust, that causes audiences to step away from organizations and brands and governments. And this is a big problem now. These are numbers that I captured a few years ago, these stats, but it's only gotten worse. I kind of don't like presenting that it's only gotten worse, because this kind of insidious cynicism, it undermines all institutions, journalism, government services, public health, every sector of our economy that makes products or sells products or attempts to market or merchandise products. And as designers, we need to reckon with that fact. If we want to have jobs in any of those capacities, we need to reckon with that fact, because creeping cynicism undermines businesses, and it undermines the places that we hope to work and do good work as well. But I think as designers, we are well positioned to address it too. So I argue that this is our problem and our opportunity. So here's kind of the secret, the problem statement, I would say, for the future of our work. To regain trust, we must empower users. We must empower our audiences. And I think you already have the tools to do that. Whether the users that you serve are consumers, other businesses, citizens, other organizations trying to partner with the government to make something for citizens, or donors or voters, to regain their trust, we must empower them. And by educating people and rebuilding their confidence in themselves and their ability to make good decisions with information, that's how we regain their trust in the organizations that we serve and our society as a whole. So that gets us back to this guy, to this idea of authority, because the content that we can offer, the content that we support through design, that is a form of authority. It's saying, I'm here, you're not, so let me tell you about this experience so you become more knowledgeable as well. Brands that teach us about their product category, governments that teach us about how to best engage with them, that comes from a position of authority. It comes in the form of product descriptions. It comes in the form of being able to interact with things on a page and gain your own empirical knowledge. It comes in the form of touring around an experience, maybe with a product, whether that's with a new car or in a museum exhibit, and forming that knowledge on your own. That takes vulnerability. And that's not a weakness, it's a strength. It's saying, we're here, you're not. Come in, let us tell you about it. So yes, we're in a difficult place right now. I think we've seen that across our economy. And the erosion of trust is hurting any industry that sells products or ideas or attempts to inform or persuade. But I think there is hope, and it starts with empowering our audiences. Because if there are people looking inward for answers, the least we can do is meet them there. So to regain your audience's trust, we need to empower them with useful, usable information. That has three components. I want to go through these kind of quickly with a few examples and then dig into more questions, because these ideas around voice and volume and vulnerability, those are the same tools that those Renaissance era letter writers used so well. Those are the same tools that anyone that designs information for consumption uses so well. So voice refers to the distinct personality that manifests both visually and verbally in everything an organization does and everything a brand does. So do you project maybe a sense of tradition, or are you telling a story that's more about innovation? Are you witty and polished, or scrappy and creative? And again, this is everything both visually and verbally, because hopefully an organization is pretty cohesive across those two different kind of angles. So voice tells an audience who you are, how you are, and if they can trust what they know about you and where you're going. It's also saying, they trust their instincts about what they know about the organization? But when a brand looks one way and sounds another, or if it changes over time, constantly reinventing itself, maybe pursuing new offerings, it runs the risk of alienating its original audience. I think we've all had that experience of maybe going into a restaurant or going into maybe it's a doctor's office, or just clicking over to a website and then thinking like, I don't recognize this place. This is not the place that I used to know. Is it even the same? It's by using a consistent voice, a consistent look and feel to expose changes, to get people comfortable with them. And in plain language, that's how users maintain their confidence, both in an organization or brand, but also in their own knowledge of where it's going. So I want to think about that a little bit, because that idea of how an organization knows where it's going, a lot of that goes to the idea of consistency. And when we talk about consistency versus novelty in design, that can be a bit of a challenge, because it's really going back to this idea of the message architecture of a brand, their hierarchy of communication goals. This is something that I focus on with all of my clients. I've developed different tools to help them get at it, different card sorting activities, but really being able to say, this is who we are, this is who we're not, and this is who we'd like to be through the transformative process of branding. That's how organizations evolve in a way where everybody that is communicating on their behalf or making products on their behalf is all kind of working together, working in alignment. Until an organization knows that, until they have that sort of creative brief that says, it's most important to us to communicate that we are cool or hip, or what's the difference between the two, or that we're innovative, or that we're trustworthy or reliable. Until they know that, they can't know if they're communicating well or just putting stuff out there, spitting things out into the ether and figuring out, well, is it even resonating? That idea of consistency builds community with an audience, because it tells people, this is who they are. This is how we relate to them. This is who I am when I walk into that store, when I buy a product from them. And it comes through clear thinking, as well as a confident perspective in terms of knowing who they are. It's the work of designers, not just to manifest that, to say, all right, because we said it's most important for us to be maybe elegant and classical, that's why we're using Bodoni, that's why we're using this particular color scheme. It's not just our work to manifest that, but also to take the reins and say, let's figure out who we are. Let's figure out what we're trying to communicate so that we can all do so clearly and confidently. An organization that has done that pretty well over time is Mailchimp. So they're an email marketing platform. A lot of businesses use them, and they've helped their voice evolve over time with consistency. They started out as a small business serving other small businesses. And now they've matured. They're no longer a small business. More than 60% of the world's email marketing goes through Mailchimp, goes through marketers using the Mailchimp platform to manage their lists and whatnot. Early on, their mascot that you can see up there by their logo type, Freddie, the email monkey, he would serve up copy. You would hear error messaging in the voice of a monkey, which sometimes was a little disconcerting, but I think disconcerting was part of their brand for a while. But as I said, over time, they've matured. They're no longer this small business. They've also added other services like e-commerce. And the thing is, even as they were adding more stuff, they never wanted to alienate their original target audience. They didn't want people coming to their site and saying like, who are you again? I don't know how I interact with you, or if you even still support the needs of my business, my small business. A lot of their audience are folks that maybe have shops on Etsy. A lot of them have small businesses where they're the sole employee, and they want to make sure that they're always accessible to folks in that capacity as well. So they've taken strategic steps to make sure that some parts of their brand never change. They use this bold banana yellow through all of their web presence, all of their print collateral. It's Cavendish yellow, which is Cavendish, it turns out, is the species of banana that is most consumed in North America. You see Cavendish yellow across their platform. So they're still using the same color scheme, but now they've varied their illustration style over time. They've been able to evolve their illustration style. So in different contexts, they appeal in different ways. They've also changed their voice a little bit, where for different audiences, if they're talking to people that are new to the platform or new to marketing, they offer a consistent level of detail, but they've evolved their editorial style guidelines so that if they're speaking to experts or people maybe coming over from Shopify or some other competitive platform, they're able to speak to them in a slightly different tone of voice. So their look and feel and their tone of voice is familiar and consistent, but not monolithic. They vary it a little bit depending on the needs of their audience, as well as the needs of the different platforms in which they communicate. So that means in things like their annual report, you see the same yellow again, but they're bringing in additional typefaces. They're maintaining like the same sort of like witty tone, but again, they're varying it a little bit depending on the context. They build community by sharing the work of their customers, by showing off different events and marketing emails and spotlighting what their customers are doing. That has not changed, even as they've gained additional customers. So they've evolved their brand to account for that, to really bring more people into the fold. So big contrast to that kind of marketing empowerment, marketing enablement organization is the British National Health Service. They do the same thing. So they've brought in this kind of thinking that says, even as we are telling broader stories through our content to help our target audience of people that are maybe engaging in our healthcare system make better decisions, even as we're doing that, let's put a focus on how we streamline copy so that people always know what to expect, what to trust about us. It means that their designers have had to take steps working with their content strategy team to educate content creators to say, you know what, you might be a doctor, but not everybody in our audience is doctors. Not everybody has your technical expertise. So how do we meet people where they are? Well, it's through a visual style that is familiar and non-confrontational. We're not asking people to learn a lot just by looking at us. People know that big red callouts usually mean this is the most important thing on the page. Yellow content tends to be more advisory, sort of a just so you know. And the language we use shouldn't require that people have medical experience. So let's not write it all in passive voice, and let's speak in the common vernacular. So that means they use language like pee and poo because that's what their audience uses. So the design of the content itself is appropriate for the audience and appropriate to help bring them along. And then also, as you look across their site, they're always speaking in the same kind of visual language that is pretty familiar to people there. They're using the same fruitiger that's been used across all of their communication for more than 20 years. So if voice refers to your overall tone and maybe the how you communicate, volume refers to how much you communicate in both length and level of detail, and again, visually as well as verbally. So how do you know how much to say on a topic? This is like the classic question of how long should that blog post be anyhow? But also, how many images do you need to have in a gallery to tell a complete story, to help sell someone on an idea or on a product? Also, how detailed do your diagrams need to be? When you're thinking about the information design, are you an IKEA that says, hey, we have enough faith in you that with one Allen wrench, you're going to be able to fix the world? Or are you a brand that says, our products are more complex. We're not going to talk down to you. So we're going to convey that level of complexity with more detailed diagrams and a more detailed graphic language. We know that brevity and bullets have ceded space to long form content, even on e-commerce sites. So how do you determine how much to say or how much to show on a particular topic? How do you know how much content is enough? Turns out the answer comes through in user research, whether by sitting down, conducting interviews or a focus group, or just by looking at like the back-end data on how people are using information. You know you've offered enough detail when your audience can make good decisions and feel good about the decisions they make. And that's something that we can measure on things like an e-commerce site. You can measure it in the rate of product returns. In something like going through an exhibit and people getting a good sense of information, you can tell looking at how quickly they're going through it, how much time they're spending with an idea, and if they're needing to like go back and forth a lot to compare information or maybe take into account opposing ideas. So this is something that we can measure. Not always a terribly sexy idea, but that's the thing that enables businesses to hire us and feel good about the decisions that they make as well. So I want to share an example as far as like how much content from Crutchfield. They're an electronics retailer. You might visit them to buy like a new camera lens, or if you're thinking about taking into account new like home audio systems or new audio systems for your car or something, and just trying to gauge like what's better here. So they produce a lot of content. Really long pages. You can see there on the left where I've zoomed out, that's one of their really long pages comparing two different camera lenses if you were buying it for like a DSLR. They also use a lot of different content types. So they're including sample images, they're including diagrams, bulleted lists, paragraphs, lots of subheads, kind of mixing things up that way. When you dig into their actual copy, sometimes they're phrasing things in rhetorical asides, sometimes they're sharing personal anecdotes, sometimes there's like little bits of Q&A and FAQs. So they see how people are using all of that content and they're learning from it. When somebody sees one of those really long pages, what most of their audience does is read down through it, they get to the very end, and then they click to go onto another page to keep reading more. And it's because people spend a lot of time on their site getting comfortable with purchases before they make those purchases. You know you have enough content when people can make decisions and then move forward without any kind of buyer's remorse. And that's what they've been able to really figure out there. Because rather than maybe pushing people to make good decisions and then not ever rethink those decisions, what they're trying to push people to is to make confident decisions, to say, yes, I've gained enough information that I can feel good about it. And in a world where media and politicians are gaslighting us, saying, you know, don't trust the evidence of your own eyes, you can't trust your own research on this, smart brands help us gain education to regain confidence in ourselves, in them, and in the strength of our society. That's a design problem too. That's a big design problem too. I had the opportunity to talk with their brand manager, and she said, we want everybody to have enough confidence to feel like they can make a decision and feel good about it from the moment they click add to cart until it arrives at their houses. That shouldn't be a really high bar for designers to hit. But in many organizations, it's tough to make that case that sometimes more can be better. Sometimes more information can be better to empower good decisions. So we see how education drives empowerment, empowerment drives confidence, and confidence drives trust. And in some organizations, they call that customer loyalty, and that's a good way to sell it up the food chain. But it's also about how business leaders, how businesses can create a stronger society through their choices in storytelling and sharing information and empowering people with that information. One of my other favorite brands to do this is America's Test Kitchen. You could say they cook up confidence, I guess. So they earn attention and love and loyalty by empowering their audiences, by meeting them where they are, by designing information so that the people that look to their content can have a good, happy cooking experience. So they're always working at how to offer the right level of detail and amount of information for someone's mindset and channel and device. So that means if you're a novice chef, you can easily find definitions for basic cooking techniques. If you're a more savvy chef and you get their magazine or watch their cooking shows or read one of the more than a dozen different cookbooks they publish every year, you can find more advanced cooking techniques. Across all of their different platforms, like I mentioned, there's the TV shows, there's an online cooking school, they've got their Twitter feed, their Instagram feed. They're always optimizing content types so that it's right for the specific reading and use case. So that means if you are kind of just pulling up a recipe on your phone because you realize it's your turn to cook that night, you can just swipe through it on Instagram and see each step of it, just illustrating the image that's right there for you. But if you want to sit down with their magazine, you can also see pages and pages of wisdom mulling over different cooking techniques. So they're not shying away from the details. Instead, they're trying to empower people with those details. When I spoke with their chief creative officer, Jack Bishop, he said, we're trying to engage people by designing things so that it engages all of their senses. We're never just saying bake for 30 minutes because not everybody is that kind of chef. Instead, we're saying bake until it looks like this and feels like this, which is about 30 minutes. You can see how they really appeal to the sort of people that are like, well, I could navigate by going 50 paces north. And then the other people that are like, tell me when to turn when I'm going past that old barn or where somebody used to park a motorhome that's no longer there. I am more of that type of driver and I guess also that type of cook. So he's saying that we're teaching people to use all of their senses. We're designing to engage all of their senses because it enables them to be successful because success breeds confidence. So it's not just about hearing from one famous chef. They're not selling this like cult of personality. Instead, they're selling empowerment. This idea that you too can be successful in the kitchen if that's what you're looking to accomplish, if that's what you need to do. So this idea that success breeds confidence, that's a good thing to learn about our audiences because we know that sometimes that's what they need to feel more empowered and to feel like they can engage in a better way with the world. Another organization that I had the opportunity to work with that digs in this capacity is Lint and Sprungly. So oftentimes print publications need to be concise and focused, but they also need to build trust with their audiences. Lint engaged me to create an internal publication to engage the people that work in their chocolate factories, that work in their marketing departments, that work developing packaging for their goods and trade show booths, because they realized they were seeing a really high rate of turnover. People weren't feeling a sense of alignment with the company. And this wasn't just an HR problem. This became a design problem. It was an internal communications problem. People were leaving because they didn't always see how the work they did was contributing to the company's success. So they wanted to empower them by educating them. So we worked on creating this new internal publication that came out a few times a year to talk about all aspects of retail chocolate production, from sourcing and supply chains to design and packaging and merchandising. And we did that by sharing the right amount of content. In this case, volume meant detailed images that always included the human angle, showing hands and people, and longer sentences that sought not to dumb things down in their explanations, but to help people smarten up so that they could see how they fit into the company and how the company reflected their contributions. So I want to talk about that third pillar now, vulnerability. So Lind's corporate leadership had to be vulnerable in how they shared information, the amount of information that they chose to share. All this work comes together, the voice, the volume, it comes together in this idea of vulnerability. Individually, a consistent voice, appropriate volume, those are characteristics of good brand-driven design and content strategy and marketing. It's through by being vulnerable that those efforts unite to foster trust, of saying, we want to bring you closer. When businesses engage in this way, it's really the cost of connection and transparency and authenticity. Those are a lot of big, heavy buzzwords in many marketing departments, but they can pay off in a big way if an organization is willing to open itself up, maybe risk ridicule or criticism by making its values visible, by sharing more about its roadmap, by taking the time to bring its audience closer. The smartest brands grow stronger and gain trust by owning their mistakes, prototyping in public, and by acting on their values. One of my favorite examples of this is Penzeys Spices. So Penzeys put a stake in the ground around their values several years ago, kind of putting themselves out there. But when you're a company and you put yourself out there, that's how you find your community. In the wake of the 2016 election, Bill Penzey, the owner, he took to Facebook to make clear the company's positions on immigration and racism and said that, the guy that's currently in the lead for president, who's stoking hatred for immigrants, that runs counter to our company's purpose, which is bringing people together around cooking as an act of love. And for anybody that might have said, hey, Spice Boy, stay in your lane there, he doubled down on authenticity by saying, this is our lane. Cooking is political. Our family favorites represent the story of human migration, and they're flavored with spices that are sourced from regions scarred by war and oftentimes US foreign policy. That paid off in a big way for their organization. He wasn't looking to make it pay off because it's risky and it's vulnerable. And when a company shares its values like that, it draws headlines and criticism. They lost some customers, but then they saw their sales spike to record levels. And that happened every time he made their political values known, usually in Facebook posts. And over the last few years, Penzeys has enjoyed a 50% increase year over year in their online sales. As more and more people would share his posts, they grew to know and trust the company and the brand, and also saw themselves as part of the community. Might not have been people that subscribed to Cooks Illustrated from America's Test Kitchen. It might not have been people that saw themselves as chefs. Maybe they weren't buying spices for themselves, but they saw this uptick of people buying spice packages to give as Christmas presents and birthday presents. In contrast, Penzeys' closest competitor believed in a policy that businesses should not engage in politics. They offered a discount code, all caps, no politics, and their sales did not climb over that same time period. But we can see how vulnerability, like voice, it tells people who you are. And you can use a brand's voice to find your audience. And as a designer, you can empower people to help them better identify with and find your organization or your cause or whatever entity it is that you're supporting with your work. I am a big believer that we own our talents. You own your skills. And as you're deciding with whom to work, with what organizations to support with your skills, as they let their values be known, as they are vulnerable with what they share about their organizations, that's something that can empower you too, to decide where to share your talents, with deciding where you want to contribute and what sort of brands or organizations you want to strengthen with your skills. So if you're an organization that maybe has done more than just putting a stake in the ground around your values, maybe instead you need to recover from a big, nasty mistake. I think it takes even more vulnerability to acknowledge deficiencies and ask for help. We've seen that play out a lot over the past few years when organizations are at their most vulnerable, maybe when they're stumbling away from mistakes, maybe wounded by errors of judgment, or the CEO has done something incredibly stupid in terms of how you're engaging with employees or how they're engaging with particular audiences. What comes next is what matters most. And we all watch it when it happens. If a company will double down on defeat, try to hope problems just kind of can be brushed away, or if they embrace the opportunity to earn trust. I hesitate talking about Zoom while on Zoom, but let's go there. So over the past few years, we've seen how Zoom has offered a masterclass in vulnerability. In December of 2019, they had about 10 million daily meeting participants, most of whom were business customers, most of whom had IT departments that most of which had security protocols. And then by March 2020, as the virus reached pandemic proportions, those 10 million daily meeting participants jumped to 200 million daily meeting participants. It was something like 90,000 schools across 20 countries were quickly jumping on using Zoom as the platform by which they met. And businesses were responding to COVID-19 by saying everybody work from home now, and everybody's having birthday celebrations and happy hours and book readings and whatnot on Zoom. And it became this golden age of wearing slippers, whether you were like in like the business mullet of sort of like dressed up on top, who knows what down below. And more people than ever before wanted the platform to perform in ways in which it had not really been designed, often doing it without the guidance of an IT department who might have said, hey, you're gonna wanna set a password for that meeting to ensure only people you invite can attend. And we know what happened next. It was like, enter the Zoom bombers. Things got really funny in a lot of preschool classes. Now, the CEO, Eric Yuan, he could have called out those issues. He could have said, you're all using it wrong. But he didn't. Instead, in April of 2020, he wrote a blog post that has become a model in building trust through vulnerability. He drew his critics close, and he spoke in this humble but confident voice with a volume of detail that respected his users and with vulnerability to bring them into the process and help them hold him accountable. First of all, he apologized in the first person. He said, we recognize we have fallen short. I am deeply sorry. And here is what we are going to do about it. He moved on from there by saying what had happened, by sharing things in the right level of detail that demonstrates really respect for his audience's intelligence. And then he pivoted to make that you're using it wrong problem into an opportunity, which wasn't spin, it was smart. And then he talked about how to hold him accountable. He moved on to credit the community. He offered a plan to hold him accountable for a resolution and said how they'd be enacting a feature freeze, shifting all their engineering resources to focus on trust, safety, and privacy issues. The following week, Zoom made virtual waiting rooms and meeting passwords the default for all new meetings. Then he detailed how he'd be conducting weekly webinars, publishing a transparency report, and in that report, designing the information so that it could be easily understood by people that maybe didn't have the same kind of technical background that he had. He was giving up control in exchange for earning trust in a response that was swift, it was specific, and transparent. The business itself was designed to support that because folks were at the table early enough to say, how are we going to make sure that we can communicate quickly with our audience without having to go through a lot of legal reviews? How are we setting the standards for good communication? Again, so that we don't have to rethink this, but we can immediately engage with our audiences when a crisis happens, because it's going to happen. So we can see from those examples how voice, volume, and vulnerability add up to empower people, to renew their confidence, and build trust. And that's what people look to from organizations, from governments. That's what people need more than anything as we stumble back from a few years of gaslighting and cynicism. So many people have lost trust in institutions, but it's smart organizations and smart designers in those organizations that can step into that void and help them regain trust. And I think regardless of the industry in which you end up working, what you do can be instrumental in that effort of thinking how we can empower people, not just helping an organization put on a brave face, but how we expose the inner workings of that organization, how we can educate people with how to interact with it, how to use a product, how to make smarter decisions about buying a product or engaging with a product. Because it is easy to be cynical, and we have so many reasons to be cynical. But cynics look at the world as it is and say it's worse. Designers look at the world as it is and say it can be better. We are in the business of professionally having hope and empathy, and saying we know how to make things better. And I think if you are hopeful that the world and how we interact with it can be better, let's work so that it will be. Because at the end of the day, people still act with hope. We all think if we scroll a little bit further, go a little further down that YouTube rabbit hole, we're going to become that much smarter, that much better enabled to go about our days. And right now is a time to affirm that hope. We can design our way out of cynicism and toward trust. And I think that's something you can do for yourself, for the organizations that you support, for your community, and for society. And thank you very, very much.